Hello and welcome. Today we're going to break down benign breast tumors, but we're not going to think of them like scary diseases. Instead, let's see them as architectural outcomes. Like different buildings that get built based on a really simple set of cellular rules. And that brings us right to our big question for the day. How in the world can a breast tumor be totally harmless and at the same time be shaped like a leaf? It sounds weird, right? But the answer isn't some super complex biology. It's actually just simple, elegant architectural logic. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand anything that's gone a little bit off, we first have to get a rock-solid handle on the original blueprint. So what does normal breast tissue actually look like when you zoom way, way in? Everything, and I mean everything, starts right here in what's called the terminal duct lobular unit, or TDLU for short. You can just think of this as ground zero. It's the little neighborhood in the breast where all the action happens, and crucially, it's where pretty much all growths, good or bad, get their start. So this little neighborhood is built from four key things. First, you've got the stroma. Think of this as the landscape, or the supportive ground everything is built on. Then you have the ducts, which have an inner lining of luminal cells and an outer layer of myoepithelial cells, and the whole thing is neatly wrapped up in a basement membrane. These are our main players. Now, what makes all of this tick? In a word, hormones, specifically estrogen. During a woman's reproductive years, estrogen basically sends a signal saying, grow, 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 to both the landscape and the ducts. And that right there explains why these tumors usually pop up in younger women, why they might feel a little bigger during pregnancy or parts of the menstrual cycle, and why they tend to fade away after menopause. So now that we have the blueprint, let's look at our first architectural twist, the fibroadenoma. This is by far the most common benign tumor, and the easiest way to think about it is just the landscape is overgrowing a bit. So how does it happen? It's really just a simple two-step dance. First, the stromal cells, our landscape, start to multiply. That's the real event here. Then, as this landscape expands, it just squishes the ducts that are sitting inside it. The ducts themselves aren't actually growing, they're just getting compressed by the pressure from the outside. And this process creates something you can actually feel. Because you have this self-contained little ball of growing tissue, it feels firm, smooth, and kind of rubbery. And you can move it around easily under the skin. The architecture of the tumor literally creates the physical sensation. It's pretty cool. Now, when a pathologist gets a look, they see the exact same story. On a large scale, it's just a perfectly round, firm mass. But the real magic happens under the microscope. You can clearly see that overgrown stroma, and inside it, those squished, distorted ducts. But if we zoom in even closer on those ducts, this is the golden rule, the absolute key. Those compressed ducts still have their normal two-cell layer, the inner luminal cells and the outer myoepithelial cells. As long as that two-layer structure is intact, it's the definitive sign for a pathologist that everything is A-OK. The blueprint is a bit warped, for sure, but it isn't broken. All right, let's move on to our next structure. It starts with the same exact idea as the fibroadenoma, that stromal overgrowth, but this time it turns the volume up to 11, creating these big, rolling, leafy hills. This chart just nails the difference. See, both are driven by stromal proliferation. But in a phyllodes tumor, the stroma is hypercellular. It's way more dense, and it grows way more aggressively. So instead of just squishing the ducts, it actually bulges into them, creating these leaf-like projections. And that's exactly where it gets its name. Phyllodes is just Greek for leaf-like. And this more aggressive growth means it shows up differently in the clinic, too. A fibroadenoma might grow slowly for years. A phyllodes tumor, on the other hand, often gets noticed because it's a large mass that's growing, and growing fast. Of course, anytime you hear the words rapidly growing, your brain kind of goes, uh-oh. So does this more aggressive growth mean it's dangerous? Well, here's the deal. Most are still benign, but pathologists have a checklist they run through just to be sure. They look for things like a really high rate of cell division, cells that look kind of weird or abnormal, and, this is a big one, whether the tumor has nice, clean edges or if it's starting to sneak into the tissue around it. But to keep things in perspective, even for the small number of cases that get called malignant, only about 15% of those will ever actually spread somewhere else in the body. The huge majority, even the ones that look a bit worrisome, stay put and can be cured with a clean surgical removal. Okay, for our last tumor, we're doing a complete 180.
Everything we've talked about so far has been about the landscape, the stroma, growing out of control. Now we're going to see what happens when a tiny little tree grows inside one of the ducts.
Yeah, this is a whole different origin story. The problem isn't the stroma. This time, it's the epithelial cells, the cells that line the duct that are doing the growing. They form these delicate, branching little structures that stick out into the open space of the duct, kind of like tiny corals. And because this is all happening inside a major duct, usually right behind the nipple, the clues are totally different. You're not likely to feel a mobile lump. The number one sign is nipple discharge, which can be clear or even a little bit bloody. The growth itself can be so tiny, you'd never even feel it.
So we've looked at 3 really different tumors. They seem unrelated, right? But now we're going to tie it all together into one simple, really powerful algorithm that'll help you remember all of this.
And here it is. This is the core idea of this whole explainer, right here on this one slide. It all just comes down to which building block decides to grow. If it's the normal stroma, you get squish ducts, and we call it a fibroadenoma. If that stroma is hypercellular and grows like crazy, you get leafy projections, and we call it a phyllodes tumor. And if it's the epithelial lining cells instead, you get those little fronds, and we call it an intraductal papilloma. The name of the tumor is literally just a description of its architecture.
Which leaves us with one final thought. We've seen today that benign tumors follow a very clear, predictable set of rules. So, what happens when that logic just breaks down? When the cells completely forget the blueprint, ignore all the rules, and just start invading wherever they want? Well, that's the story of malignancy. And that's a story for another time. Thanks for watching.